You're listening to the Weekend Sport Podcast with Jason Pine from News Talk ZB.
One of the big sporting stories of the week broke on Monday. The Age in Australia reported that cricket officials from India, Australia and England were meeting to discuss the possibility of Test cricket fragmenting to allow for more series between the sport's big players. The potential new structure would see Test cricket split into two tiers. India, Australia, England would be joined by South Africa, New Zealand, Pakistan and Sri Lanka in the top tier. The second tier would be made up of the West Indies, Bangladesh, Ireland, Afghanistan and Zimbabwe, with the likes of the Netherlands and Scotland, who are not currently full Test playing nations, theoretically moving in to complete two separate pools of 7. This has created a lot of discussion around the place. Veteran Australian cricket broadcaster Jim Maxwell joins us on Weekend Sport to discuss. Jim, thanks for your time. What's your overall view of the proposal for a two-tiered Test cricket system?
I don't think it's a very good idea for the future of the game, but I mean, it all comes down to these commercial realities that we're being confronted with in the battle between T20 franchises and the importance of bilateral cricket continuing, particularly Test cricket. So I'm afraid at the end of the day, it's like an avalanche, and it's controlled to a large extent by the power of money from India. They're controlling the most of what goes on the game with the TV rights and the rest of it. So my line really, as far as I know Australia is concerned, is simply if it doesn't pay, don't play. And that's pretty much what Cricket Australia have been doing in the last few years. Okay, we'll play against New Zealand, but we're certainly not playing Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan or Ireland. And we may have done that in years gone by when there was this altruism in the world of cricket whereby you wanted to help and whatever, the expansion of the game. But I think, unfortunately, in the current situation of the scheduling of the game, and as I say, T20 franchises getting bigger and bigger, look at your blokes. They're all going off somewhere to play, and you can't deny them the opportunity to do that because it'll be a restraint of trade. So I don't think it's got many legs, really, this idea. And it's sad to say the rich will get richer and the poor will struggle. So you don't think it will happen, but there will still be a sense of the likes of Australia, India, England playing one another more often than the lesser lights of Test cricket? Well, it seems to be the way a lot of people want it to move because they want the dollars that come from the most attractive form of the game, and that's really the top three nations playing, with a little bit of Pakistan, New Zealand, South Africa thrown in. But as we've seen, even South Africa have been struggling to put their best team out to play Test cricket. You know that from last year when they visited New Zealand with a second-rate side. And yet here they are playing in the final. So I think the whole business of WTC is probably in jeopardy the longer we go because it's only going to be the top 6 nations and no one else will get a look in. I mean, if you have a two-tiered system, whether or not you have promotion and relegation, I don't see how those other nations, the West Indies too could be one of them, one of the great powers of the game historically. It might even be England if they have a bad year or two. I don't see how they're going to get up and fight again against the top teams if this system comes into play. So, it's a convenience, really, for those who are controlling the game to do what they want to do, and they'll dole out a bit of dosh to everyone else, but it won't be enough to sustain Test cricket in a meaningful way for the lesser nations. If India, Australia and England played each other more often, how much would that dilute the special nature of those series? I think it did a few years ago when we played England back-to-back. We played in 13, 15 and then 19. That was over there. And then here we played 2 series as well. So I think it did at the time dilute the value of the contest. But plenty of people turn up and a lot of eyeballs out there, so you can justify it on the basis of a commercial operation, and that's more and more where we're going with this, unfortunately. I don't see any way of stopping it. That's the problem. As much as we might think that it's important to have this expansion of the game, it will be limited to playing at the Olympic Games, T20 competitions perhaps, but Test cricket, no, it'll only be played by those that can afford to. That's
a very sad state of affairs, isn't it, Jim, given the storied history of red ball international cricket?
Well, what we're saying is really Test cricket will survive, and a lot of people would be arguing that this is the only way for it to survive. For the countries that can afford to play, continue to play it. But we're really taking the game back to where it was 60, 70 years ago, before any of, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, you name it, any of these other countries came into play. So I think Test cricket is going to survive, but not in the ideal form of trying to have more countries playing Test cricket because, as I say, they can't afford to.
What then of the West Indies, Jim, this incredible cricket nation that gave us Greenwich, Haynes, Richards, Lloyd, Dujon, Marshall, Garner, Holding, that wonderful team of the 80s. Am I just being a bit naive and misty-eyed here to suggest that they will continue to be a Test cricket participant?
Well, you could worry about South Africa similarly. I mean, they've always historically been a power until they had the apartheid years, and they've come back quite strongly. But at the moment, they're a bit of this and that because they're playing rosters compromised by people like de Kock, who just want to play limited overs cricket, and the fact that a lot of their players can only earn a living by playing in T20 franchises, not for their country. So you've got an issue there as well. But the West Indies is a very unusual case because really the West Indies only exists as a cricket team. It's not a democratic, an economic power. It's a group of islands in that part of the world. And, if cricket's to be sustained at the next level, Olympic Games and the rest of it, will there be a West Indies team or will it be Barbados and Antigua like the Commonwealth Games? So it's under enormous pressure anyway in terms of playing collectively in a meaningful way in Test cricket. But, at least in the short term, thank goodness, Australia's playing 3 tests against them over there later in the year.
Indeed. So if we do look forward then, Jim, what is the best way for Test cricket to survive and hopefully thrive, in the face of this perpetual growth of T20 cricket around the world, franchise cricket, that sort of thing? Is this the best way that, as you've outlined, you play if you can pay or if it pays, and that's where we're looking at the next little while?
Unfortunately, yes. I don't want to be sort of pessimistic, cynical about it, but in fact, I'm very optimistic about the growth of cricket. But Test cricket's only part of that. It's really through the agency of white ball T20 that you're going to see the growth of cricket, men and women. I mean, we're trying to get women to play more Test matches. But goodness gracious, dare I say it, New Zealand won't play Test cricket, will they? So
no.
You've got an issue there. So I think, as I say, I think there will be a way for Test cricket to survive, but it won't be in the futuristic way that we imagined a few years ago when the number of countries expanded, and we were hoping, as I say, that those peripheral teams like Afghanistan and Ireland in particular, who recently came in, will be part of it. I just don't think it's going to work.
Just to finish, if we're talking money, and we are, how influential will India's desire in any decision-making around cricket continue to be?
Oh, well, it's going to be the way ahead, really. What India wants, India will get. And that transfers across to these ICC events, which basically give the ICC the finance to continue to have the Champions Trophy, the World Cups, the WTC for that matter. So if India aren't supporting that, then it's going to change. It's going to fade. So we need to have their superpower, I suppose, their control to sustain the game. That's the unfortunate situation in some ways. But at the moment, it seems to be working okay. You've got to say at least India are playing a lot of Test cricket, a lot more than Australia and South Africa, for that matter. And I worry more about the fact that because of the dollar, Australia in particular, along with South Africa, will be playing less Test cricket and more of the one-day stuff. You know, Australia did not play a Test match between the end of that New Zealand series and in March, April last year until November. And they're only playing 10 Test matches this year. So, unfortunately, I think the die is cast in terms of the shape of the game. And that's a worry.
Jim, you're preaching to the converted over here. We've got no Test cricket in the first 3 months of the home summer. The 3 months of the calendar year. Normally we look forward to red ball cricket here in January, February, March into April. None. Not a single international red ball game to be seen. So, yeah, it's an interesting time ahead for the game on both sides of the Tasman and around the world. Thanks for joining us across New Zealand. Really appreciate your expertise.
Cheers, Jason. All the best.
All the best to you too, Jim. Jim Maxwell there, a voice that is well known. He's seen a lot of things in the game of cricket.
For more from Weekend Sport with Jason Pine, listen live to News Talk ZB weekends from midday or follow the podcast on iHeartRadio.